Well, good morning. Welcome. Good morning. It's good to have you. We've been looking at how should a Christian live. And one of the things we would like to look at as we continue that journey is how to not be your own worst enemy. And welcome online. It's good to have you. And for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, counting today, we're going to be looking at different things that we find in our owner's manual from the guy who made us on how to live and how to keep from being our own worst enemy. So stay with us for the next few weeks, and we'll make our way through that. How many of you have, at various times, you could look back and you're sitting in a spot and you're thinking, you know, I made every decision that put me here. And I am apparently my own worst enemy. I think I do it once a week. But all of us have the potential at times to be our own worst enemy. And we have some very interesting teaching here in our owner's manual, which God has sent to us, which would tell us how to keep from doing that. It's easier to watch somebody else and to observe and say, you know, I think that he's his own worst enemy when it comes to his marriage. I think he's doing things that are going to mess up his marriage or his finances or his relationships or his work. And you're watching and you're thinking it's just going to be a matter of time till this thing unravels. And we kind of think, but I would never do that. Well, truth is we all have the potential to become our own worst enemy. I do it, you do it, but this morning I'm picking on you. All right, so we've all participated. The interesting thing is that when it comes down to it, we were all present when we made the bad decisions. We were there. We were right there when we made it. And many times, a bad decision is really the first decision in a sequence that gets worse and worse. In the airplane accident investigations, they very rarely find one thing does it, but rather there's a series of decisions that were made which make the situation more and more complicated till finally it gets unrecoverable. A pilot friend of mine used to say, David, remember, there's no situation so bad that you can't make it worse. And today we're going to look at, hopefully, preventing us from making it worse by preventing it from starting. Catching it right up front. And we wish often that we could get a do-over. I wish I could do my 20s over or 30s over or whatever. But we want to look at any age, what are the teachings which will help us avoid self-destruction or being our worst enemy. Now, Jesus doesn't use words like you'll become your own worst enemy, but if you look at some of his parables, for instance, the one where the person who listened to these words and does not apply them is like a person, he doesn't say who is his own worst enemy, he says it's like a person who built his house on the sand. In other words, good for you, you built a house, but you built it on the sand, and you are about to suffer the consequences of your decisions. And so that's how Jesus introduces to us the topic of your decisions matter, and sometimes when things collapse, it was you who built it on the sand, you who made the decisions that got you there. So, for the next, for 3 weeks in a row, we're going to look at 3 habits, and today we're just looking at the first habit, which is pay attention to the tension. Pay attention to the tension. And And but say that with me as we start. Say it out loud. Pay attention to the tension. That was a practice. This is all you got to take home this morning. This is the whole message. You can get up and leave as soon as I say this. All right, ready? Pay attention to the tension. What is that referring to? That quite often we have a decision point, and from within us there's a sense of hesitancy. There's this sense of pause or a sense of conscience. Or really what there is a tension revolving around this decision we're about to make. Now, what happens is we either make the decision and we override the tension or the little gentle cautionary sell ourselves on the idea of why we should do what we want to do anyways. And we give ourselves a sales pitch. And I think that the things that we tell ourselves, if somebody told them to us, or you're in a store and somebody told you something as stupid as we tell ourselves, we just walk away and say, look, idiot stick, that doesn't even make sense. But when we tell ourselves that, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I know I got one at home just like that, but this one's new. Yeah, like a salesman saying, yeah, you don't need it. You got one at home. This is redundant, but this one's new. And he told you that, and you'd walk out. But when you tell yourself that, so the reason we pay attention to the tension is because it stops the process of getting ready to tell ourselves what we need to hear to move in the direction we probably shouldn't be moving. The interesting thing about this is when we make up these hugely preposterous self-talk stories, we believe them. The human species may be the only one that can tell themselves a lie and then believe it. So we're a unique character. Now, right up front, in those decision points, we have either an issue of conscience or somewhere deep inside of us, we have a hesitancy. Are you tracking with me? There's something about this decision that just doesn't feel right. And I need to tell you, every time that I have made really bad decisions, it was when I overrode that gut check. I knew very well my gut was saying something here, but I still went ahead, rationalized why I did it, and did it. So you have a built-in protection that creates tension around a decision, but we have to pay attention to that tension. So this morning, to illustrate this, there is a story in the older part of our owner's manual, and we're going back to the period of the kings in Israel. And the king that we're looking at, eventually he will be King David. And King David went from obscurity, went from being a shepherd boy to being heir to the throne, to being the king. And it started on this journey. He went to visit his brothers to bring them some food, and he got into a conflict with a warrior where he defeated the experienced, powerful warrior in the name of Israel, and it catapulted him from obscurity to a hero. The problem with David was that he saw things from a different and unique perspective. As the Israeli army was sitting there, and they were kind of in a valley, and the Philistines actually had the high ground at the time, but Goliath, this huge warrior, was saying, look, we don't have to go to war. We don't have to have all this bloodshed. You don't have to go and take your injured and wounded and dead home. Just send up one person to defeat me, and if they do, we will lay down our weapons, and you are the victors. And that's all you got to do. And he called out, he was taunting the Israeli army. to send somebody up to challenge him. David looked at that and he said, that guy's not taunting the army. This is the army that is a representative nation of God. He is taunting God. All God needs is one volunteer that he can empower to go and get the victory. So this is a God issue. This is not a war issue. And so David says, I will be the volunteer. God can use me to fight that battle for him. And that's what he did. He went up and he defeated Goliath, the warrior who was challenging the people. And what happened was he went from a shepherd boy to a hero. He got to marry the king's daughter, and he's now, the king is his father-in-law, and he moves from a field to the palace. And that was a pretty fast trajectory, but there was some problems with his journey into becoming a hero, and this was it. David, it turns out, was a tremendous strategician and a warrior, and he would lead the army into victory after victory. And people started to sing songs like, King Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his 10,000s. And Saul became enraged and jealous and angry at this young upstart who started to get the accolades that he felt should have been going to him. And so, number one, there was a jealousy problem. Number two, the problem for the king at the time, King Saul, was not only was David gaining popularity and they were looking to him to be a leader, he had a son named Jonathan who was heir to the throne. And if David were to be placed on the throne by the people he was getting so popular, his son Jonathan would not be the next king, and King Saul's family and line and dynasty would end at that moment. So Saul, understandably, knew he had to kill David if he was going to save his kingdom for his kids. Now, and he tried to do that. He tried to kill David on several occasions until David had to leave Jerusalem and go into hiding. Now you have a shepherd boy, married the king's daughter, living in a palace, back to living in exile with no place to call his own, no home. And so he's back to the fields where he started this journey from. And on top of all of that, David's popularity and stuff, King Saul had heard a rumor that, in fact, David had already been anointed the next king, and if that were to happen, his line would be cut out. And the reason there was a rumor there was because Samuel, when David was younger, had actually anointed him to be the next king. So Saul's founding fears were legitimate from his perspective. And he, in earnest, went after David. Now, he finds out that David is in the Badlands of Israel, and it's a rugged region, and he is going to go and get him, go to battle, and kill him so that he doesn't do everything that he's afraid of. So when we pick the story up, it says that he was in the rugged countryside there, and this is where David was. This is the countryside, and you can see even there's a cave full of caves, places to hide. It would be almost impossible to come across someone you were hunting in that area. And the next one. Now, you can see how difficult it would be to find someone and how easy it would be to hide. So it was rugged, but also there was provisions, there was water. And here we have one of underneath the top soil, or top layer, there was water running out, and it would come out at various places. So David, as he started to be in exile, gathered around him a lot of other people who were also in various difficult circumstances until he had a fairly substantial group of, we could call them warriors or fighters or whatever, around him. And so the whole group of them went out there, and it was a place they could survive, a place they could have water, and a place where they could protect themselves. And this is the place that's generally believed by the area in Gadai, where David and his men would rest and relax in this. And so if you're ever in the Middle East, at least the guy who collects your money to let you look at it says it's authentic. But his stamp is still on the countryside where David was hiding out and where King Saul went to get him. And now, just out of interest, this is not anything to do, but if you remember the Masada, the last battle of the Jewish insurrection against the Romans, where the Roman soldiers had to literally scale that and capture them. And they did a siege, and it took a long time, and there was a lot of loss on both sides. So this is the Masada, that city. And when the Roman soldiers finally got to the top, and they knew the next morning that they were going to, the battle had been pretty well lost, and the Israelites, the Israel soldiers in there, and some families, rather than be captured by the Romans, when the Romans broke through and got in, every one of them had committed suicide so that they wouldn't be subjected to the Roman abuse. So it's just an interesting thing. In that same land where David was hiding is this particular fortress, which was several thousand years later, but 1,000 years later, but the battleground where they think. So when King Saul found out that David was in this Badlands, he takes 3,000 men. Now, that's a bit of overkill. Probably didn't require anywhere near that much. But the problem was David was so skilled in battle that King Saul didn't want to be messing around with him. And the men that David had gathered with him were all sort of rough and ready. And so he grabs 3,000 men, and he goes after him. Now, if you look on your insert, you'll see that first, this is from Samuel, the prophet, is keeping a record of this. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all of Israel, and he set out to look after David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Now, when they're describing this, everybody who read this in that time knew where that crag was. And they came along to the sheep pens. They'd, oh, yeah, I know where he was. Okay, I see where he was. And there was a cave there, and Saul went into it to relieve himself. So here's the setup, is that King Saul is going along, chasing him, and Samuel says when he got to this point, which everybody that he's writing to would know where that was, and the cave that's back of it, King Saul had to go to the bathroom. So when a soldier's got to go to the bathroom, you just get off by yourself and you're on your own. But when the king's got to go, you stop the whole 3,000 men, the supply train, the servants, everything else comes to a stop, and the king can go into a cave and do his business. So this is what happened. The 3,000 strong army stopped, and the king goes into the cave to do his stuff. He takes off his outer coat, and he throws it down so he can find a hard rock and do something. So there he is, and of course, of all the coincidences that you can imagine, he's in the very same cave that David and his men are. They were at the back of the cave. It was dark. He can't see from light into the dark, and so he's at the front of the cave, and they're looking at him, and they're going, hey, a dead man just walked in here. Here's where the tension, and where you have to pay attention to the tension. David has a choice to make. King Saul is in a rather vulnerable position, and King David, or the future king, who's already been granted the throne, who will be king, has the opportunity to kill King Saul, walk out with his head on his sword, declare himself the new king, command the allegiance of the army, which probably they would have, but he could have been king that moment, that day, and that's about all that he had to do. And the soldiers were saying, listen, David, this is not coincidence. This is what you've been telling us all along, that God was going to deliver the kingdom in your hands. He's delivered it. Now go collect the kingdom, kill the guy, and become king. And David is crawling up through the dark, but he has the tension. He has the conflict. And David, as he's creeping through the dark, he gets to where Saul's robe is. And so he's there with his knife, and he's got to make a choice. And the choice is to kill the king, who's a little distracted, or not. And something happened inside of David. The tension built until he went into conflict. And he has to listen to the inner voice or the inner tension. In this case, it says that his conscience went off. And he had to listen to that or claim his kingdom, which had already been promised to him by God. That's all he's got to do. Just go kill the king. It's yours. I set it up. You go. I don't know. He may have been thinking, they've sung songs about me killing Goliath. They've sung songs about the tens of thousands and the battles. I don't know whether I want them to sing a song about me killing the king when he was on the potty. That doesn't rhyme. And, your grandkids are coming around. Hey, Grandpa, tell us again about how you killed the king when he was going to the toilet. So there may have been a lot of things going through his head. But one of them was that God had promised him the throne. And he had to allow God to do his work and to deliver it to him. He could have argued, this is God delivering it to my hands, and that's what his soldiers were saying to him. And he was being encouraged to claim it and be the kingdom. But as he's coming through the dark and he gets to King Saul's coat, he has the moment that he listens to his inner voice. He listens and acknowledges the tension. And if you look down in verse 6, he said to his men, hey, he cut the garment and went back. Hey, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or to lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. He wasn't doing a good job per se, but God had chosen him to be the king. And with these words, David sharply rebuked the men, and he did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. There were and oftentimes in the tension, there is what we want, but there also is principles that we're violating. Some of them are our own value systems. Some of them are things that we know from the owner's manual we shouldn't be doing. But the tension is there based on what we want to do, based on what God would have us do. And that's where David stopped and said, look, he's the Lord's anointed. I shouldn't be killing him, even though he's trying to kill me. And so David tells his men, guys, stand down, go to the back of the cave, wait, and we'll deal with this later. Now, Saul exits the cave, finally, and everybody's out there, his whole entourage and the wagon trains and the whole deal. And he gets back on his mule and gets ready to walk away. Then all of a sudden, everybody's head turns to the mouth of the cave where the king just walked out of. And there is David and his small army in the cave that the king has just walked out of alone. And you didn't have to say anything at that point. Everybody knew what could have happened in that cave. But rather than holding up the king's head on his sword, he holds up the corner of King Saul's garment. And he says, Saul, may the Lord be the judge between you and me. May the Lord avenge the wrongs that you have done to me. And he acknowledges King Saul had really acted inappropriately. Trying to kill you can really tick you off sometimes. But my hand will not touch you. I am going to do the right thing. I will not take matters into my own hands. Many times we say, well, I got ahead of the Lord. What we're saying is we took the matters into our own hands. We took charge. We didn't wait for the Lord to work it out. And we did what we wanted to do. But David says, I am not going to take matters in my own hand. I'm going to let the Lord work this out. Now, David gained a victory that day, not a military victory, but where he won over was in the area of character and in the area of integrity. He walked away as the clear victor because he didn't follow the natural thing, the logical thing, the desired thing, the things his troops told him to do, the thing he was pressured to do. He came against every force placed on him and paid attention to the tension. Something is wrong here. In our life, almost every time, you will be led by the tension to either do something or not do something. And it doesn't have to make sense. When I was younger, when I first came to the Lord, I couldn't possibly make right everything that was wrong, but the Lord was telling me about one thing that he wanted me to make right. And so, are you kidding me? I had taken the label off of a cheap flashlight, stuck it on an expensive flashlight, and checked out and bought it. And the Lord told me to go back and pay the difference. This is a big box store. I mean, they got millions of dollars in sales every year. Yeah, right, Lord. This $10 is going to turn this business around. You got me coming in there to save his future. And I don't even think he has a key for paid back stolen money on a flashlight. He doesn't even have a place to put it. Why are you doing this? And this went on for quite a while. And finally, the tension stayed, and I couldn't rationalize it away. So I went back to the big box store, talked to the first lady I came up to, thought she was a sales clerk. Turns out this was actually a franchise. It was owned by somebody. And this was the executive secretary. I should have known that salespeople don't wear high heels, pearls, expensive dresses, and makeup. But anyways, I said, I came, I just wanted to make something right. A few years ago, I did this. She said, she stopped and looked at me, and we had this is not going to go well. And I knew it wasn't going to go well. She said, I think we ought to go see the owner. He's going to want to talk to you. Right, God, thank you very much for all of this. She takes me up these flights of stairs into the owner's office, and he said, she's told me what you did, and I'm glad you came back and did that. And he said, forget it, but no, I came to pay it back. And it really wasn't going to make a difference in his business, but keep it. So we did the transaction. He became a major influence in my life for the next decades, and relationship with his children and relationship with the managers he hired, because he had several of these things. And he became influential. I wasn't going to be a minister then. That's crazy. But he also was in the same denomination that eventually I wound up in, and he was able to give me guidance, to help me to make things work out a bit. And that thing that made no sense to me, stupidest thing ever, go and give a guy with a multi-million-dollar annual sales, $5 or $10 or whatever. Actually, it was only less than 5. But anyways, it was stupid. I'm telling you, it was stupid what God was asking me to do. Changed the outcome of many, many things in my life. That guidance system, which will keep you from self-destructing if you pay attention to the tension, will also allow God to lead you into higher places if you pay attention to the tension. This week, we're finished, but the homework is to be as aware as we can, as often as it happens, to the tension that God brings into our decision-making, and we have to predetermine to pay attention to the tension. And I'm not good at this. Why? Because I'm pig-headed, strong-willed, and I want what I want, and not only that, I want it now. And I can change things and move things and make it work out. It doesn't matter how strong-willed you are. You have to yield to the Spirit of God and His leading in your life. This week, as we learn how to not self-destruct, the first thing is to be sensitive to the tension, to pay attention to the tension, because God is putting it there. Whether it is your natural conscience, whether it is spiritually energized, whether it is calling up some teaching from your past, it's there so that you can live what Jesus promised, the best life possible, the abundant life, and it's a gift from your Father to you to keep you out of trouble or to guide you into blessings. Pay attention to the tension. Would you stand with me? Our Heavenly Father, you are so close to us, we can experience your presence in us. Father, you sent your Spirit so close to us, it lives in us, and you said that you would allow your Spirit to give witness. You would allow your Spirit to make evident to us. You would allow your Spirit to confirm with our spirit that we are your children. I'm asking this week, Father, that Spirit, as it moves in us and leads us and guides us, grant to us a special sensitivity, a willingness, and a desire to follow those guidances that you give to us. Father, we are so privileged. We are so blessed to be your children. This week, guide us the way you want to as your children who you love. In Jesus' name, amen.